Welcome, everyone, to Live by Indeed. My name is Clint Carrens, and I am a career coach and social media specialist at Indeed. Our Live by Indeed is a monthly series covering job search and career development topics. This is the first episode that we will be live streaming on YouTube. So welcome to our YouTube audience. We're very excited to be having this episode on YouTube today. Today's topic is all about resumes. Our title is Let's Talk Resumes, Impressing the Recruiter and ATS. And we have a great panel lined up for you today that is going to really discuss what is the best way and what are the best ways to optimize your resume so that you can have success both with applicant tracking systems as well as those recruiters, both of which will be reviewing your resume most likely before you would actually be called in for an interview. Now, we're going to have a discussion with our panel, which I'll be introducing in just a short minute. But before we get to that, just want to let you know that in the second half of our live stream, we're going to have the panel answer your questions live. So if you would like to have a question answered by the panel, go ahead and put it in that live chat function. Our moderators are going to be there, and they're going to be queuing those up for me so that I can direct those to the panel. You can go ahead and do that now if you want, or anytime during the live stream. So if you're ready and got some questions right now, please go ahead. I am getting a note that it's showing that chat is maybe disabled. If that's the case, our moderators will be working on that and trying to get that fixed. But once that is fixed, please go ahead and be adding those questions as well. We also like to hear how you're doing and where you're coming from. So you're welcome to add that as well once that is fixed there. If it is fixed, when it is fixed, like I said, go ahead and add those questions in. All right, let's get to introducing our wonderful panel that we have here today. First up is Suzanne Taylor. Now, Suzanne is the head coach with Indeed's Career Services team, which provides resume reviews, writing, and consultation services to all job seekers. She is a certified professional resume writer and a career coach who has helped thousands of professionals to fine-tune their resumes and navigate the job search. So Suzanne, come off of mute there and introduce yourself a little bit more. Tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Clint. As you mentioned, I am the head coach for Indeed's Career Services, which is a recent title for me. I've previously worked in higher education in the university setting, helping college students navigate the job search, all the way up through executive coaching and helping executives find that next opportunity and promotion. So I have a breadth of experience in career development, job exploration, and in particular with resumes. And I'm really excited to be doing that full-time on Indeed's Career Services team, which does provide a lot of different services to help job seekers with their resumes.
Thank you so much for being here today, Suzanne. And I did just get word that the chat function is enabled now. It should be working just fine. So again, like I said, if you've got questions or any comments for our panel, feel free to start adding those in, add them at any time during this live stream. So our next panelist is Jennifer Herrity. Now, Jennifer is a career coach and content marketing manager here at Indeed. She has over 12 years of career services experience working with job seekers from all career stages in industries such as advertising, PR, marketing, communications, government, nonprofit, and tech. And over the last 18 months, she has worked with industry-specific subject matter experts to produce resources that address the needs and pain points of job seekers. Now, you can see her career advice videos on Indeed's YouTube channel, so you might recognize her face. Jen, come off of mute here and introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I am so excited to be here. Usually when I'm on Indeed's YouTube channel, it's just me talking to myself, giving career advice. So I'm so excited for the Q&A portion of this. I really do hope that you all will submit some questions so that I can, myself and the other panelists here, can really help you out. This is a great opportunity, both for us and for you. You've got a great wealth of expertise here, and we are so excited.
Thank you so much for being here, Jennifer. All right, our final panelist today is Sally Perez-Ramos. Now, Sally has worked within University Career Services for the past 15 years, overseeing program initiatives and advising undergraduate and graduate students, internship programming, and marketing communications outreach. So Sally works at Wake Forest University School of Business within the Market Readiness and Employment Department as an associate director, advising students within the Master of Science in Business Analytics and Master of Science in Management programs. Sally has also been a resume writer for the past 8 years, supporting individuals across all fields. So Sally, please come off mute and introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Yes, I have worked in higher education for 15 years, and I have worked with students across all different fields, liberal and STEM, as well as graduate students. And I am a career writer, a resume writer, and career coach, and have helped individuals within all fields, going up to the executive level as well.
Sally, it is a pleasure to have you on the panel today. All right, so that's our panel. And we're going to get into some questions that I have for the panel. Before we do that, though, I do have a quick disclaimer that I need to relay to you all, and that is that the content in this live stream video is for general informational purposes only and should not be taken as personalized career advice or any other type of individualized counsel. Okay, so what we're going to do is I have a few questions for our panel that I'm going to throw out to them and let them discuss. After we've had a little bit of discussion there, we will move on to Q&A, where I will relay your questions that you've provided to us and allow our panel to answer. So again, at any time here, throw those questions into the live chat, and our moderators are going to be in that chat relaying that information to me. Okay, so panelists, let's get into my questions. All right, so let's say someone is crafting a resume for the first time, or maybe it's just been a while since they've needed a resume, and so they are basically starting from scratch. What is a good starting point for them, for these people in creating a resume? Jennifer, why don't you start us out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when it comes to resumes, a really great start is to begin by filling out a strong outline. So with every resume, you know there are going to be specific sections that you're going to include. And you want to take a top-down approach. That seems to be like a really easy way to get started. So starting with your name and professional contact information right at the top. Notice I say professional contact information. Email addresses are free. Make sure that you create one, first and last name, first and last initial, something that's really professional and makes a strong statement right at the beginning. Then you're going to be moving down into a professional summary. So this is like a 2 to 3 sentence description of who you are as a professional and what are those key accomplishments and skills that are really role relevant. You'll probably hear that phrase a lot throughout this conversation. Role relevance is key for resumes. And even if you're new, if you're just starting out, maybe you're an entry-level professional, just graduated, and you're not necessarily sure if you have what kind of information you'd include in a professional summary. It's really about thinking like, how are you uniquely qualified for this role? What are those key attributes that would be really stellar that you have that you would want to call out right away? So that's kind of information you would want to include there. Then you're going to have your work experience, skills, and education. And some optional fields or optional sections that you could consider including would be maybe some volunteer work. Maybe if you don't have direct working experience that's related to the role, you can absolutely include unpaid experience and any kind of academic projects that are relevant, or any personal projects that you've done that are specific to the role. So definitely starting out, build out that outline, and then you can kind of fill in from there.
I think it's really good to just kind of get a piece of paper and start writing chronologically, beginning with your most recent down, job title, company, location, month to year, and really first kind of focus on this list a little bit so that you can kind of organize yourself. One thing I always recommend to anybody is, even when you're at a current job, keep this resume of yours ongoing where you're documenting things, because you will forget what you did. The best thing too is to also think of accomplishments to list. And if you can, add some sort of quantifiable metric to it. That really is something that captures employers' eyes. And the other thing I do is I study different job descriptions that this resume may be going towards, and really highlighting key words that I feel I can incorporate within the resume.
Yeah, to piggyback off what Sally and Jennifer are saying, it's great to really get a good outline, and there's plenty of online resources to help you create that general outline. But then actually putting pen to paper, as Sally was mentioning, is really important. And it can be difficult to start brainstorming what you've done, especially if you haven't been keeping track yet as far as what you've been doing. And so one of the things that I tell clients when I'm working with them and they're starting from scratch or starting after a long period where they haven't used a resume is to start just looking back through performance evaluations or looking back at previous projects and things like that to get ideas for some of the things that you might have done that you might want to include, because it's really normal to have writer block, to not know what to write about with your work experience. And so you can really just take a look at what's unique to what you've done. If you do still have access to some of those former communications or performance evaluations about your work, that's a great place to start. In addition to looking externally, as Sally mentioned, at potential job descriptions that you're interested in and getting ideas from that as well. And that can really just get the brainstorming going. It's much better to have too much content and really just go through that initial brainstorming session and then figure out how to package it effectively into that outline.
Yeah, exactly. I think for a lot of our audience, that biggest part is just getting started. I think those are some excellent tips to just get the ball rolling there. Sometimes that's the most important step to take. And that's all really great advice, all really good steps that can be taken. Let's kind of go on the flip side here. And that is that there are really a lot of bad practices and honestly, a lot of bad advice going on out there when it comes to resumes. So in all of your time reviewing resumes, what is the number one bad practice that you just consistently see people doing? And then what should they be doing differently? Sally, let's start out with you this time.
Sending the same resume over and over again without tailoring it to the role that they're applying to. I tell this to my students and clients all the time. Sending the same resume out is like throwing pebbles into the pond, hoping that you're going to hit a fish on the head. It's just not going to happen unless you're specifically tailoring it. The other thing that I see is that people are individuals love to use templates. And, some of these really fancy templates are just, don't do it. As pretty as it looks, we need to focus more on just getting into a Microsoft Word document and seeing what we can do there.
Yeah, Sally, I think, just thinking from the recruiter's perspective and the hiring manager's perspective, when you've seen a template so many times, like you can spot a template just like right off of the bat. And so you can really tell those, who's maybe just kind of copying and pasting as opposed to really focusing on the content, right? I think sometimes people are they get caught up in making sure that it looks really nice. They get caught up in like using, colors and graphics, but it's like, it's the meat, right? We're looking at the content and the text and being able to provide that quantifiable data. And so I would say like the number one thing that I would see as I was reviewing resumes is, listing job responsibilities, but not necessarily listing what they did, but not providing enough context to show how was it impactful. And that's really what people want to see, right? They want to see the impact of your work because they want to be able to imagine you having that same impact with them. And so, a really great format that you can use for bullet points would be starting with that strong action verb. Did you led, you initiated, collaborated, starting strong, and then following and using what's simply called the who method. So what did you do? How did you do it? And what was the outcome? And that outcome is really the strong piece, right? So what are those results? So I would say, yes, providing just what you did, but not necessarily really focusing on that outcome would be the biggest mistake that I consistently see.
The common theme here, as hopefully everyone's picking up on, is you don't want to be too generic with your resume, whether that's the template or the content. And so that's definitely the biggest mistake that I see as well, is just seeing a resume that is very broad and generic and vague. I always, as a resume writer, take the approach, am I writing this bullet point? When I write this bullet point, could it apply to someone else, or can it only apply to this one particular person as well? So that can be a really good test as you're figuring out how to really customize your content. You really want to make sure that it's unique to you, because that's a really common mistake I see, is people just listing out general job responsibilities without any impact, without any unique tailoring to the roles they're applying to, or really without any unique details at all. And I'll give a personal example just to bring this into context. I've worked as a sales associate and previously, right? A very, very common first job. And I've worked in two very different environments. One was a bookstore, which dates me a little bit, but I worked in a bookstore in a very intimate small business environment. And the interactions that I had there versus working in the big box, high volume environment are really different. The number of customers I was working with is different. The types of conversations I was having were different. And so even though my title is the same, I would write about those two experiences very differently on a resume. And so I always just challenge folks to make it really personal to that specific role, to what you specifically did in that role, and where possible, show the impact, the quantified achievements, like my colleagues have mentioned as well.
Yeah, when I was coaching, I would always tell people, one of the biggest things you need to do when you're crafting to avoid kind of these same bad mistakes about creating something that's too generic is to get out of your own mind and get into the mind of a recruiter. Because in your mind, when you put all these generic kind of things down, all the details, all the results and all that producer. All the recruiter has to go is on that piece of paper. So unless you're being very explicit with the impact that you made, unless you are differentiating yourself, creating a very unique document, the recruiter is not seeing any of the things that in your own mind. You've got to be able to relay that better. So you have to get out of your own mind and get into the mind of what if I was a recruiter, what would impress me? And I think that goes a long way to kind of doing a lot of the things that what you all were mentioning there. Once you can get out of your own mind and get into the mind of a recruiter, it helps out a whole lot on that. For those of you joining us late, first of all, welcome. I wanted to let you know that we're having a discussion right now over resume best practices. But if you have any questions in regards to resumes, or really any job search or career development related question that you have, it does not have to necessarily be about resumes. Please feel to put it in the live chat, and our moderators are cultivating those and bringing them to me. And in a little while, our panel is going to be answering those questions. So anything about resumes or anything, any career coaching advice, we have some wonderful career coaches here who can answer all sorts of questions. Please feel free to drop that in the live chat. So moving on to my next question, let's pivot a little bit and talk about applicant tracking systems. Before we do, for those of you who may not be overly familiar with what an applicant tracking system is, and that's okay, a lot of people don't. Applicant tracking systems, also known as ATS, are software used by companies and recruiters to assist with their recruiting, applicant assessment, and hiring needs. So an ATS helps them weed through large numbers of applicants. So your resume will first go through the ATS before a human being ever sees it, normally. And whether that human recruiter ever sees your resume many times will depend on how well your resume is optimized for ATS algorithms. Okay, so with that kind of background there, panel, what are your top tips for creating an ATS friendly resume? Suzanne, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think that we would all say the number one tip is just eliminate any fancy formatting. We've already talked about the templates, the very pretty templates that are out there that just have too much formatting. And so when a computer is scanning those, they aren't going to be able to read all the information correctly, or they may not read all the information correctly. And you really don't want to take that risk. And so just creating a very simple format is really important. And what that means is creating clear headers or section titles. So things like summary, work experience, education, certifications is really, really important, because that's what an applicant tracking system is going to scan for. For example, if a job description requires a bachelor's degree or 3 years of experience, the ATS is going to be scanning resumes for the dates for the work experience to see if you have 3 years of experience. They're going to be scanning the education section to see if it says bachelor's degree. And so you really want to make sure you have your information very clearly laid out with clear section titles and clear descriptions of your work experience, your education, your credentials, et cetera, because those are the most common things that recruiters really are going to be programming into the applicant tracking systems to look for. Remember, there's a human on the other side too. Applicant tracking systems don't install themselves on a company's platform and just go to town. A recruiter is still programming it to scan applicants and screen applicants for certain things. And so just make sure you're reading the job description well and clearly make sure that's clear on your resume the different qualifications that are required for a specific posting.
The one thing I can't stress enough is utilizing Jobscan. I'm not here to necessarily, I have no, dog in the fight with them or anything like that, as far as like I don't work for them. But if you were to use jobscan.com, it really does a good job of allowing you to put your resume through and compare it with what the job description and qualifications are, and pulling out those words that are missing from your resume. And then it allows you have 5 free times to do this per month, right? So it allows you to really see what words were missing, how can I incorporate them better? So this is where we come into the tailoring of the resume. This is why it's so important not to send the same resume out over and over again. And then with Jobscan too, not Jobscan necessarily, but something that I have learned very recently when it comes to resumes and applicant tracking systems is that you need to go from a Microsoft Word document to a PDF. Not going in like different areas, as far as like it started off as a Google Doc, and then I transported it to a Microsoft Word document, and then I transported it to a PDF. It starts changing the codes within the text, and so things start coming out weird. So the best way to ensure that your resume is not going to come out all weird or be unable to be read by the ATS is really just keeping it simple, starting in Word and then saving a PDF as within your just saving the PDF and then uploading it to the application.
Yeah, I would say it's really good just to understand the kind of what part of the process, the hiring process, an ATS actually plays, right? Like an ATS is there to support recruiters and to sort candidates kind of by relevancy, right? It's looking for those keywords and those key requirements that are highlighted in the job description. And so, just understanding that these are prevalent, they're heavily used by large companies and even small to medium-sized companies. It really is important to kind of keep them top of mind. and just realizing that, yeah, your application is likely going to go through an applicant tracking system, and taking the time to pay attention to the information that you put on there is going to help with the sorting, right? It's going to help raise you as a qualified candidate, or as one that more closely matches what they're looking for. And so in addition to, I think Jobscan is a really great tool. Indeed actually offers an instant resume scan ourselves. So you can actually create your free Indeed account. You can upload your resume, it'll be scanned, and it gives you some great coaching advice in addition to letting you know how your resume is parsed. So you can see what is it pulling for education? What is it pulling for skills? And giving you tips to say, hey, you're using pronouns on your resume, and most resumes don't have those, so consider removing them. Or, you've only listed so many skills, you might consider adding these additional ones. So it gives you some really great tips that you're able to use and decide whether or not you want to incorporate those into your resumes, depending on what your goal is. And I think with most people, the goal of a resume is to get that interview, right? So using the free tools that are available, both through, a service like Jobscan or even through Indeed's instant resume review, they're just really great for helping you to make sure that you're getting to that next step.
Awesome. Wonderful advice, wonderful resources that we're providing here today. Thank y'all for that. Okay, so eventually, hopefully, we make it past the ATS. But before we get that interview, and you all alluded to this, it's still going to be assessed by a human recruiter too. Now, it is possible, and I know as career coaches, we've all seen this before, where you can create a resume that is going to quote unquote beat the ATS and get past the ATS, but is ultimately not going to be a very recruiter friendly resume. So what are some things that you all would recommend job seekers avoid doing so that they don't run into this scenario where they've created a resume that's going to get them highly optimized in the ATS, but is likely going to get them rejected by a recruiter? Jennifer, why don't you start that off?
Yeah. So, as we've just talked about applicant tracking systems, we talked about the need to compare the job description to your resume and kind of highlight what are the trends and, what are they looking for that you have. And I think a common pitfall that happens is, sometimes we'll see a required skill and then we just kind of stuff that skill. If we're saying like, product demonstrations is a required skill for a sales associate, we're listing product demonstrations all over the place, but maybe we're not necessarily explaining what is the impact of all of the work that we did. So we're adding those keywords, but we're not providing that context of impact. And that's what a recruiter wants to see, right? The ATS said, hey, they've done product demonstrations. That's a good fit for your role. But then the recruiter is going to be looking for that and say, like, well, how many sales were driven from this? How did this improve our relationships with clients, right? Like that's what the context they're looking for. So that information is really needed. And that shows that you're tailoring it's important to tailor your resume for the role as well. So if you're looking at that job description, making sure that you're aligning the experience that you do have to the experience that they're looking for. And it just shows that you are doing your part to connect the dots for the recruiter to make it a little bit easier for them to see right away why you're a good fit for the role.
I definitely think that a big thing that will get a recruiter upset is typos. As a career coach, I mean, I'm not saying I'm the next Hemingway myself, right? But you may think you've just written the greatest thing ever, and then I come back to it and I'm like, oh, what did I write? What was that? It's like this, I got this like moment of a blackout writing this masterpiece, right? So definitely I use programs like Grammarly to help run things through. I can't necessarily trust spell check because it doesn't work too well in the grammar, but at the same time, I can't just trust Grammarly. Sometimes I will read the document backwards just to kind of make sure that everything ebbs and flows correctly. I will have another set of eyes look at it. It has to be perfect. And that is definitely a big chore to put on someone. And this is why the application process takes so long, is that you do have to spend some quality time with this document. I definitely think that it's important to spell check, to run it through multiple things, and be very sure that you're staying in the right tenses. And typically in the past tense, typically in the third person, I come across so many, I did this and I did that, and that's just such a huge no-no in the resume writing world.
Yeah, I love that you called out the spelling and grammar piece, Sally, because your resume can absolutely get a high score from the ATS and from Jobscan and still have errors in it. And so it's important to not rely solely on our technology for catching that. So I think that's a really important call out. I always find it funny and not a good way that when a resume a person will say they're detail oriented or they have high attention to detail on their resume and then they have errors in it. And so you always want to make sure that it's nice and clean when you submit it, and always getting a second set of eyes to read over. It's a great way to do that, as well as the tips that you mentioned. Also a big fan of Grammarly as a free tool for checking that. By including the keywords and things like that. When you're tailoring your resume, it's going to resonate with a recruiter as well, by lining up the words on your resume, your skills, your experience with the job at hand. So I pick that battle with clients sometimes that, hey, and yeah, the company may not be using applicant tracking systems. We don't know what parsing they have set up or what they're going to be scanning for. But if you still optimize your resume with the right keywords aligned with the job description, that's also going to resonate with the recruiter. So it's still something that's really important to pay attention to as well, when you're thinking about how to optimize your resume for both Human Eyes and ATS.
Thank you all so much. And sorry, I may have frozen there for just a second. So thank you for the panel. Continuing on there. I've got one more question to the panel there. Before I do, I want to remind you all one more time, we've already got some great questions coming to our panel here in a minute. If you have a question that you suddenly realize you want to ask the panel, it's not too late. Please drop it into the chat there, and our moderators will queue it up, and we'll be able to answer it here. Our panel, I should say, will be able to answer it here. So my final question before we get to that Q&A is that we can acknowledge that resume best practices are going to vary depending on what industry you are in. We might even have some people on the live stream here in our audience that are like, well, I'm in this industry and I feel like some stuff may be different. And they're probably very correct in that. But there have to be some core components that are just universal across all industries. So what are some core components that you believe recruiters across industries will absolutely want to see in a resume? Sally, why don't you start us off?
We've stated it over and over again, is any kind of quantitative information in your accomplishments is definitely going to be a big boost, and helping the recruiter understand what you've accomplished, being able to tell that story concisely, which can be really hard for some of us, right? But really trying to capture it within so many words. You really have to state what the result was in some sort of quantitative number. That it's just so important to be able to state that.
Something that I recommend for everyone, no matter what industry they're in, is a really well-written summary. A lot of times people focus a lot on their work experience, which you should. You should focus a lot on your work experience and writing about your accomplishments and quantifying your achievements in your work, like we've mentioned. But I think that a well-written summary can really help align your profile with the job at hand, just right off the bat, 'cause it's going to be the first thing that recruiters see when they open your resume. And so really customizing that summary and giving it the same attention and care that you would your work experience section goes a really long way in capturing folks' attention and enticing them to read the rest of your resume as well. It's that opening pitch. And we can get into more summary best practices if folks have questions about that. But it's the area of a resume where I see folks miss an opportunity to really make themselves stand out.
Yeah, that's such a great way to ensure that you're tailoring your resume for a role, right? Is to really kind of spend some time looking at that kind of short section that is so high impact and is so visible to a recruiter, right? Because if you're thinking about it, even like, I know newspapers, people still read newspapers, you think about it like, what is the top, what is your headline, right? Like that's the most important piece because people read less and less as they go further down. So I think you made a really great point about spending that time and attention to creating a tailored summary, Suzanne. And I think it's just important to look at just recent relevancy for the role. I think as we grow in our careers, we want to list everything, especially if you've grown in an industry where, maybe the experience that you have is still really relevant. But if it was, if it's something that you did 15 plus years ago, it's not as recently and as applicable into the role that you might be applying for now. So really making sure that you're focusing on recent role relevant experience, a chronological resume, which is actually presenting your information in a reverse chronological format, right? You're starting with the most recent experience at the top. That is typically the best resume format to use. There are some other instances where you might think like maybe it's maybe functional would work, where you kind of categorize by skills. But most instances, the chronological format is going to work best for most job seekers because it's going to allow you to highlight your most relevant experience from the last 3 to 5 years, right? That's really important is from a recruiter standpoint to really look at what have you been doing recently that's relevant to this role that I have at my company.
I also think that one point to note is nobody wants to read the novel, right? So really limiting the resume, if you can, to a page, at most 2 pages. And if you go into 2 pages, make it a solid full 2 pages. And you can do all kinds of nifty things to ensure that happens without it looking too crowded. I find as a resume writer that when I get a resume for someone who maybe has worked 15, 20 years, but in the same role, but in different companies, and then they send me this 5-page resume, I can tell you my eyes roll. So you have to definitely cut back and really focus on what's important, what's more recent, and is this job in relevance to the role that I'm applying to, just like Jennifer said.
You bring up a really great point, Sally, which is I think people sometimes don't make the effort to just make multiple versions of their resume. And it's okay to have your master or less kind of like one single comprehensive version that maybe is 5 pages long, where you have kind of everything that you've done throughout your career. But don't let that be the one that you submit for the role, right? Take that time to tailor, pull out those really important pieces to create that condensed and concise and highly relevant document for the position. So yeah, definitely great to track all of that and to have a single version where you have all of that listed. But taking that time to kind of tailor it down to be super concise is going to be really important.
What I usually recommend to students or to clients is keep track of every job that you're applying to, because if you're in Google or whatnot, save the resume under the title, so-and-so's resume for Honeywell, that way, you used that resume for Honeywell. And the other thing too is save the job description, because once they close it, it's gone. And then you're not going to remember, if you're just applying for lots of jobs, you're not going to remember who you applied with or what the title was, what did they want, what were they looking for. So save this information, create yourself a spreadsheet. Something that we advocate for our students at Wake is create this spreadsheet that helps you also look and see, can you track an alum from your university, or anybody that you know that may be there? Can you connect with them? So that's going into a whole nother career coaching aspect, but just save the document, save your resume, title it correctly, because if you just send it as, I don't know, resume, but you don't put Herrity _Jennifer _resume for Indeed, it could get lost when the recruiter needs to find it.
That is great information. Great information. And I'll leave our part of the discussion here because we have some great questions to get to from our audience. Our moderators have pulled some great questions for us to answer. Now, if you find that your question is not getting answered here, it may be, I am going to go to questions where we may be hitting some new territory than what has already been discussed. So I just want to make sure if we have time, maybe we can circle back around to some of those questions that we're still hitting on territory that we kind of well covered here, but I want to hit the ones that are kind of fresh and new when it comes to topics here. Panelists, when I ask the questions, whoever wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. Our first question, we were touching on it at the end here, and I think this would be something to go into more detail for, because I think this is very important. The question is from, and I do apologize if I mispronounce the name, but Geetha. And the question is, if we have so much job description information in our last role, how do we ensure the resume stays to one page, and what should we highlight? Sally, I know you and Jennifer were hitting on that there's lots of techniques we can do. Jen, you brought up like keeping multiple resumes. Let's get into that. What are some specific techniques that our job seekers may be able to do to help them condense that resume down into a more readable format?
This comes back again to really looking at the job description, right? And focusing on what are they looking for. And so what I would recommend is, again, I also think it comes down to the bullets. Nobody wants to read like 6, 7, 8 bullets. So I try my best, depending on your level of experience, try to limit it to 4, no more than 5 bullets. So these have got to be really good pairing so that they can see, oh yeah, that's, we're looking for somebody who can do data modeling and visualizations, and you've talked about it as something that you've done in your role and accomplished. So really kind of study. This is why I say save the job description, because you can write your notes, you can do what you have to do, but try and see how much you cannot take and copy and paste in there, but how much can you marry what they're seeking with what you have.
Yeah, another trick that I use when I am tailoring a resume for a specific role and cutting it down. Jen, I'm guilty of the 6-page master resume that I have for myself with all of my bullet points on it that I've crafted over the years. But when I'm actually looking at tailoring it down into a concise work experience to send, I look at what's the highest impact, right? What's the most impressive thing that I've done? The first thing that I cut is just basic job responsibilities, like we talked about earlier. You really want to be able to show the impact and the achievement that you had. So if you're looking at which ones to cut the ones that don't show an achievement or have a weaker achievement than some of the others. Keep the ones that have the numbers, the quantified results, the metrics, and include those, because that's really going to make you stand out. In addition to using the ones that are most relevant to the job, as Sally mentioned as well. That's number one. But then if you're still looking to cut down further from that, just make sure that you're focusing on the ones with the highest impact and achievement. Another trick I use, because I have worked with clients who spent 10 plus years in the same role, and that's hard to get that into 5 or 6 bullet points, right? Another trick that I use is, maybe you create a separate section where you talk about some projects that you worked on. You still have that reverse chronological resume and work experience, but then maybe you have some extra sections at the bottom where you talk about other projects or talk about other skills, other competencies that you have. If you do just have a lot that you've done and you can't really fit it concisely into one section, that's another hack that I use.
Yeah, these are absolutely great points for ensuring that you're highlighting like the top, 3 to 5 bullet points on the resume. And you might still find that there's other information for that role that you would really like employers to see. Put it on your LinkedIn, right? Save it for the social networking sites where you can include much more information beyond what's necessarily impactful based off the job description that they've listed. Because and then with that, include the link at the top. It could be the social networking site like LinkedIn. Maybe you create a personal website where you go more in depth and do case studies or explain some situations a little bit further. If you link it on your resume, people will click it. Like the recruiter's going to look at it because it's more insight that you're providing into who you are. And yes, on those social profiles, you can include more information. You could include writing samples. You can include articles that you've written. You can include a lot of great information that they can go more in depth into once they've established that you're meeting the needs that they have. And they might even see from that, like, oh, you've done stuff that I didn't even know that, like maybe this is like a nice plus that I didn't think that we needed, but that you have it. And you're like, oh, that's really great. But for the sake of what you're representing on your resume, it really is, you want to stick to those kind of like 3 to 5 that are high impact and highly role relevant and recent.
I think it's important to stress here as we're talking about, really streamlining your resume, is we also don't want to go too far with streamlining. And, the question brought up, trying to keep it in a page. And in many instances, that is kind of the optimal standard we want to try and hit. But there are a lot of instances where maybe keeping it to 1 page is not in the best interest of the job seeker, because they may be cutting out way too much information that is going to make them, an optimal candidate for that position, particularly if they've, worked a couple of jobs now or have a more robust work history. Maybe it does bleed onto the 2nd page, because there is enough hyper relevant information to fit into a page and a half. The ultimate goal is not necessarily I have to fit it on the page, 1 page, or a recruiter is not going to read it. It's I need to streamline it so that every bullet point, everything that I'm putting in is of high interest to that recruiter. And I'm not starting to, for lack of a better word, bore the recruiter by putting in a lot of things that are not relevant there. So I think it's important to stress that is always the goal. So we have some other great questions here. Another great question comes from Danny. I really like this question. And it's more general, pivoting from resumes. Any advice on trying to find a career you are passionate about? I love that question. Anyone want to chime in on that?
I'll jump in. I've always got thoughts on things, so I'm sure the other panelists here too do as well. But I think it's just really important to, I would say, career planning and just job search in general takes a lot of self-evaluation. It just takes a lot of you like sitting down to think about not just, what do you really enjoy doing as like hobbies and interests, but even reflecting about the work that you're currently doing now. What brings you what are the aspects of the job that you do? Is it, maybe you really enjoy digging into data and you want to move into a career where you're able to do kind of more in-depth analysis, but you've got to fill a skill gap. So that kind of, that leads you down to the next road in the next step in your career planning process, where now you're interested in taking more classes to kind of help you develop and, set you up for success there. It really is kind of stopping and doing some personal inventory and just not thinking about like, what are the jobs that I might like to do, but what are the, like maybe what's the work environment I want to be in? What kind of schedule do I want to have? Really kind of thinking about those attributes and seeing what would work well for you in that way.
This conversation I've had so many times, especially with my undergraduate students, and I would ask this one question every single time, and it would always stump them, and it would B, what are you passionate about? It does require, like Jennifer said, a lot of self-reflection, because at the end of the day, you gotta love your job, right? You gotta love going to work and doing what you do, because you're going to be doing it in different realms, right, for at least the next 30 years. So, and I'm not saying that, you'll stay there for 30 years. You probably job hop companies or whatever, but is it social justice? Is it music? Is it art? Really sitting there, you can even map it out if you need to. We were just having this conversation yesterday in a meeting, and my boss referenced Catherine Brooks' book, What Color Was My Parachute and What Did I Major In? And just mind mapping it, right, is what she said. And so writing in the middle, really just start writing out different words that come to your mind that really help you think of, this is what I like to do. I like to fish. I like to go to the movies. I like film. I like reading. Eventually then you start kind of minimalizing things and helping you to get to what are these key words and where are they kind of directing and pointing me. But it's not going to come to you overnight. It's not like a 5-minute conversation. It really requires some deep thought of what would make me happy. And sometimes I'd even ask students, do you like working with animals? Is animal advocacy your passion? And that definitely can open up so many other doors. So really kind of just self-reflection, like Jennifer said, is the way to go.
Yeah, don't be afraid to set aside time to do that, because it does require set time away from your job, away from other distractions to do that. And I wanted to follow up on something that Jennifer mentioned as well. She alluded to maybe taking some additional courses or a certification or something like that in an interest area. And that's a really great way to explore other avenues that you might be interested in. I have taken several Coursera courses for free on different topics that I thought were interesting. And for the vast majority of them, by the time that I got to the end of the course, I was like, thank goodness that's over. I don't want to do this. I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I might once I started digging in. And so that's a really great way to just do some career exploration, quite literally a crash course in data analytics or customer service or marketing automation or whatever you think you might enjoy doing. And so that's a great way to just test the waters and figure out what it is that you think you'll actually enjoy.
Awesome. Wonderful words of wisdom here. All right, we're getting to close within like 10 minutes here. I've got some great questions here. Like I said, I'm going to try and get to the ones where we're hitting new territory here. So if we don't get to your question, our moderators will be answering any questions that are unanswered in our live stream. But let's get to this question from Ayana, and it is, how does ATS read gaps in work history? And are large gaps still a disqualifier? I think this is a very great question.
I'll jump in, and I don't have the perfect answer for this, because what I really want to emphasize is every applicant tracking system is different. And so it's really hard to, you even putting your best foot forward, following all the best ATS friendly pieces of advice, it's hard to make your resume a perfect fit for every single one. I should also mention there's hundreds of ATS, if not thousands. You may be familiar with ATS like Workday, Tailor, Greenhouse. Those are some really common ones that you might see as you're applying to jobs. So just to make it a little bit more close to reality, like what is an ATS? It's one of those systems that you're submitting your application to, and they're all going to be different. Generally speaking, I do still account for work gaps on a resume in my reverse chronological work experience. So that way, the ATS is scanning, it's seeing it as a work entry and filling in those months and years and accounting for your past at least 10 years of work experience if you have 10 years of work experience. And so essentially just including that work gap within your chronological professional experience, work experience section with the months and years, and a description of what you did in that time is my go-to. And I've had success with clients using that in general with ATS, but they are all different, as a disclaimer.
I agree with Suzanne. I think you can definitely list if for some reason something happened and you had to take care of a family member, you can put, additional work history, additional experience, and list those extra jobs that you may have not had the opportunity, like that were just too far past 10, 15 years, but you can put it in there and it will get picked up as provider or whatnot. You can also go into your cover letter. And I believe, I get mixed reviews on this. Y'all tell me. I've had recruiters say, I don't read the cover letter. And I've had some say, I read the cover letter. So take that advantage of the cover letter to really state, why is this gap happening? And more reason than not, that the recruiter is going to appreciate the honesty. And that would be my sage word of advice.
Yeah, and I would just say, as you outline it and outline that gap and that time frame on your resume, include some information. You don't have to go deep into detail as to why you had to take that gap, but I would say dedicate a bullet point or two to what you did during that time to stay relevant with your industry, with your personal or professional development. Did you take courses? What were you doing to just highlight that you were continuously learning in that time as well? And that in itself can kind of provide a little bit of some information to the recruiter and potentially to the ATS. If you took a certain course that was relevant, that could happen there. And yes, I would always say, anytime you have to explain a gap, or if you have a gap in your work history, a cover letter is a great way to kind of tell a story as to why. But again, really focusing on, what did you learn? How did you continue to grow? Because even if the cover letter isn't required, that's a good instance where, if it's optional, it's a good idea to include it, to include one with the application.
Well, thank y'all so much for that. I think we're going to have to cut it off here. We had some other great questions, but like I said, if you did not have your question answered in the live stream, it will be answered by our moderator. So we will be getting you some answers to those questions. So don't fret there. Just be checking back. So first off, I want to give each of our panelists here, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. This was wonderful. Great conversation. I want to give you all a chance to provide some final thoughts to our audience before we leave them. Why don't we start out with Suzanne? Give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, I would love to give some final thoughts. And one of those will be about the cover letter, because that does inevitably come up with when you talk about resumes, and it's something that my awesome panelists mentioned as well. I'm with you, Sally. Recruiters are really 50-50 on whether they like cover letters or not. So I say include one, because you never know if they're going to be one of those recruiters that does value that. And it can be a great opportunity to further emphasize your fit with the position. So I always do recommend submitting a cover letter if there is an option to do that. So that's my first piece of advice and takeaway. And the last one, like, if I just have to impart one thing on folks regarding their resume, it's to get another set of eyes on it, and preferably many sets of eyes on it. Give it to a friend or someone who knows you personally and have them read it. Give it to a colleague or someone who works in your profession and have them read it. If you want, Indeed has a free instant scan so you can see what the ATS is going to read, or Jobscan can provide that. There are pretty accessible resume services through Indeed as well. So there's lots of ways for you to get that second set of eyes on it at your comfort level. But that's just the most important thing for me, because you're always going to get feedback, and people are going to notice things and have advice for you that you aren't able to do even with your awesome self-reflection.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Jennifer, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I would say try to refresh your resume periodically. I think sometimes we wait until we're ready to start the job search to actually put some time and attention to it. And by then, we may not have done a really good job of tracking what our impact and accomplishments are. And so, as you go through review cycles, like Suzanne mentioned, just take note of what were those key accomplishments that, one, you were really proud of, but also were highlighted to you as being really impactful. And just kind of jot those down and plug those into to that long form master resume that we talked about, so that once it comes time for you, let's say you then are on the job hunt, you're not trying to remember what that impact was. You've already done a good job of just kind of taking some of those high impact notes for yourself.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Sally, why don't you take us home?
I should just change my middle name to Sally. Tailor your resume, Perez-Ramos, because I can't stress it enough. Do not send the same resume out. It will get you nowhere. Keep the master resume. I too, Suzanne and Jennifer, am guilty of the 6-7 page resume. Because I ebb and pull from them, right? Whenever an opportunity does come up. And just have a second pair of eyes, but tailor that resume. I tell my students, and I tell my clients, it depends. I get it. Maybe you're working full time right now and you're trying to find a new opportunity, right? So dedicate at least 2 hours, right? So at least do 2 to 3 applications per night. When I hear somebody tell me I've sent out 400 applications and I haven't heard anything, well, then that tells me a lot right then and there. You're not tailoring your resume. So spend that time, every night. And if you're on the job search full time, I recommend get dressed in the morning, go to a coffee shop, make that your little office. Starbucks will give you coffee all day long if you need it, and just start working on those applications. And just tailor as much as you can, track everything, and network. Find out who you know. It could be your mom's friend down the street. Somebody knows somebody that can hook you up with an opportunity.
Well, this has been a pleasure. This has been a wonderful experience. Thank you all so much for being on the panel today. Thank you to our audience for listening and for all your great questions. If you know of somebody who you think might benefit from this live stream video, it is going to be playing on replay on our YouTube channel. So please invite them to follow Indeed's YouTube channel. And please follow all our social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, to learn the latest from Indeed, as well as hear when our next Live by Indeed episode will be. Thank you all again for being here. Have a great day and take care.